Welcome to Education Connect by Nova, the podcast that explores innovative teaching methods and success stories, newsworthy updates in education, and current trends in the classroom. Whether you're a veteran educator, an industry thought leader, or a parent navigating the academic landscape for your child, we've got you covered. And hey, we know all about the hectic schedules in academics, so we're all about delivering content that's relevant, concise, and actionable. So hit that subscribe button and let's learn better together. Hi everyone, and welcome to Education Connect by Nova. The unsung key to teacher success is a finite availability, and which some educators say no longer exists. Autonomy in the classroom is getting harder to hold on to as bureaucratic policies get set into motion and achieving success metrics takes precedence over student success. In 2023, about 10% of Virginia's Prince Edward County School District resigned, with their exit interviews showing a surprising reason. 25% of respondents claimed that their reason for leaving was due to a lack of autonomy in instructional decisions and/or classroom management. So, how does a school district who must follow certain success metrics find equilibrium with their teachers who desire and also need autonomy in order to perform their jobs? I'm here today with Professor Thomas Connolly, a 35-year veteran educator and current professor at Prince Mohammad bin Fahd University in Saudi Arabia and senior fellow at their Center for Futuristic Studies. Hi, Professor Connolly. How are you today?
Good. Very good. Nice to be with you, Anna.
Yes, thank you for coming on the show today. I really appreciate your time. So as an educator who's had a number of years in the field and has also worked in different cultures and communities, I'm really excited to hear your take on teacher autonomy. So one thing I wanted to bring up to start, we're questioning, of course, about teacher autonomy, if it exists still, if it's going away, and of course, how to regain it. You've been in higher ed for nearly 4 decades, and I'm curious, what are some of the most significant changes you've seen in the profession over those years?
Well, I'm not going to say anything shocking, but it's the proliferation of administrators and ever stickier red tape. This has empowered data-driven, bottom-line obsessed bureaucrats with no more sense of what's best for higher education than an adding machine has of Einstein's theory of relativity. And it gets more oppressive with every semester. We can talk more about the details as we progress, but that's really the core of it.
Yes. Okay. And of course, there's a current debate about the necessity and the potential loss of teacher autonomy in the classroom. For the sake of this podcast, we'll define teacher autonomy as the freedom and flexibility to teach based on the needs of the student, not necessarily the expectations of the governing district or state. So now you're mentioning that this kind of increasing semester over semester of bureaucracy or red tape. Would you say that these are kind of contributing factors to a loss of teacher autonomy?
Absolutely. Even though universities do not have standardized testing requirements, the omnipresent testing in K through 12 education has infected higher education with assessment obsession disorder. Mm-hmm. Syllabi are now a dozen pages long or more, and the first 10 pages are administrative boilerplate, highlighting such things as course learning outcomes or goals. And this is a sort of pedagogical plaque that inhibits creativity in the classroom. I remember several years ago when faculty started getting memos about assessments, and all of my colleagues, we all said to ourselves, what are they talking about? What happened to grades? And this is how it starts. The insidious replacement of content with jargon. Mm. And even though, there aren't the standardized tests such as the MCAS in Massachusetts and so forth at universities, there's also a growing trend toward each course having unified exams, or exams being vetted by not necessarily a department chair or even a department committee, but an assessment office or a dean of quality, that sort of thing, which is quite detrimental to autonomy, not only in fact, but also it creates an atmosphere where, I'm as the teacher, I'm not really responsible for deciding the ultimate grade for my classes. And this word assessment is really, it's interesting. When you invited me on the podcast, that word came back to me, and I flashed back to the look of disbelief and lack of comprehension for what are they talking about, asking for all these assessments when, what have you been doing all these years? It also undermines the idea that we as teachers know what we're doing, and that's another problem with this issue of autonomy.
That's a great point. And it seems like when the focus becomes standardized testing, let's say in terms of K through 12 education, and then maybe even for, some other students and other grades, you start to emphasize curricula surrounding what's going to be covered on this test and not necessarily much else.
Yes.
So some educators have cited a lack of autonomy as a reason for leaving their school districts, like the example we gave before. But on the other hand, though, it doesn't seem to be exactly on the high list of priorities for administrators.
Absolutely. The lessening of autonomy is their priority. I was a member of my town's school committee several years ago. And just this week, I was speaking with a retired teachers union leader who specifically identified the oppression of teachers as the number one reason for burnout and leaving the profession. And it's not only local administrators, state regulations, which have been a major burden for K through 12 educators for years because they change constantly. In fact, it's one of the reasons schools of education have shut down. They can't keep up with the teacher certification requirements. The university where I used to teach closed down their their Department of Education specifically for that reason. That there would be students who would go through a 4-year program, assuming they'd qualify for their license, and then find out spring of senior year that they had to take another semester of courses to be able to qualify. And oppression is not too strong a word, especially now with the problems with integrating classrooms in K through 12. The constant swirl of changing regulations and inability to keep up with what's proper behavior or what's legal have led to resignations or people suddenly retiring for medical reasons, and it just creates incredible turmoil in school districts. This hasn't quite reached the university level yet, but I can well imagine with we talk about the phenomenon of helicopter parents and parents who have actually moved to the town where the college is. I don't see the day very far off when parents will be storming dean of students, demanding why their student got this particular grade or why the student wasn't chosen, for a varsity team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. Do you think that these or the lack of autonomy, let's say, is even a contributing factor to, let's say, overreaching parenting that might be bleeding into the classroom?
Absolutely. It's also part of this frightful distrust of any authority figures. There's always been a sense that, teachers, what do they know? What do they do? They have the whole summer off. Anybody can do that. And there's been particularly accelerating since COVID is the undermining of teachers' professionalism. It seems as though anyone else's word or evaluation supersedes the classroom teacher's perspective. In public schools, parents need only roll their eyes at a teacher and his or her job may be in danger. I'm not exaggerating. At the university, student evaluations, which no experienced professor takes seriously, are now codified and quantified in steel as part of the promotion process. Any experienced professor can manipulate student evaluations. I've done it to get good evaluations, medium evaluations, or low evaluations. It's very easy. The other thing is the most disturbing thing about this is the administrators who read these evaluations don't care about the individual comments. All they want are the little ovals filled in so that they can have percentages. And this is at the heart of the autonomy issue. They don't care about the individual relationship between teachers and students in the classroom. They want quantifiable data, which is absolutely anathema to the idea of education.
It's interesting you say that. It really goes back to that, what you said, obsession about standardized testing, and how even though there's not a standardized test for higher ed, it still is, it has these elements of standardized testing for teachers in a way.
Yes, absolutely.
Wow. Okay. So there are some interesting contrasting opinions about this, particularly some articles online that tend to be on the more optimistic side. So on one article, for example, in Education News, the author had talked about the equilibrium between educators and administrators, the key to this being trust. Can you delve a little bit more into the key components of trust in this kind of relationship?
Well, the problem is there seems to be no trust on the part of administrators. It is as though teachers are sort of useful idiots. They keep the students occupied while the real work of determining what the course learning objectives are, or what the goal of the course is. And I defy anyone to ask an administrator who is obsessed with goals and objectives to define the difference. I spoke to a colleague who was a graduate of the Columbia Teachers College, and I said, what's the difference between a goal and an objective? And she said, it depends on which day you ask me. Wow. Pretty much admitting there's no difference. And yet various administrators will, that's a hill they'll die on, the difference between goals and objectives. I mean, and again, it gets back to that idea, what I started talking about, jargon, these arbitrary words, arbitrary goals, course learning objectives, which are crafted in language that's impenetrable. Students aren't going to look at 10 pages of a syllabus. They want to know what their assignments are. They want to know, what work is expected of them, not, the exact procedure for filing a grievance. That's another issue. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, do you think that trust is truly what's needed in classrooms right now?
Absolutely. We need to have confidence in teachers' ability to do their job, to do our job. I think another problem is the sense that, well, you're only a teacher. What do you know? You're not an administrator. You're not a dean. You're not a vice president of, academic development or whatever, title they come up with next month. And that really, you decided to stay in the classroom, you poor thing. So, you have no validity, no real expertise. And, you don't, your word isn't to be counted on, and your authority is to be laughed at.
There's really a lack of respect and support for educators.
And it's coming from all sides now. Yeah. At one time, at least in higher education, the professors were the administrators. You become a dean, and yes, supposedly that's still true. But clearly now the careerism has replaced professionals.
I see your point. Absolutely. And isn't it so important to have administrators who understand the front line of education?
Yes. And more of them. It's possible now to become an administrator without ever having spent more than a couple of days observing a classroom.
Yeah, that's really very difficult. And I could see how there would be so much misunderstanding from both sides when they don't have the kind of necessary experience to understand classrooms at this time. Yeah.
Yes.
So in your scholarly article, Fruits from the Higher Branches of Learning, you cite that the replacement of artisanal model of education is happening with an industrial one. Can you explain more about what you mean by this?
At the heart of the problem is that business schools have an excessive influence on the curriculum. It's now perfectly normal to do a cost-benefit analysis of college degrees. And everyone, it's not even STEM, it's going into finance. And the problem with business education is I liken it to the most ardent Swiftie blowing kisses to Tay-Tay has nothing on the fad following and trend trailing that drives business education. I've suffered through business school curricular demands. I've been through an MBA program myself. Even worse, postgraduate salary averages are correlated with choosing a major or even a school.
Mm.
Unfortunately, the humanities and liberal arts faculty have been so beaten down that they consent to do business schooling, or they acquiesce to short-sighted administrators who insist that colleges grant degrees according to immediate economic needs.
Mm.
Anyone who studies the future, anyone who looks at futuristic studies, knows that we have scant idea of what careers will be in demand in the next few years. Exhibit A. Who was prepared for the economic consequences of COVID? The CEO approach to education is absurd. And I always say this, quick. Name the superintendent or curriculum director who affected your life. Now, recall how many teachers who did. Okay. And, this trend chasing of business educators, I mean, a few years ago, it was cohorting. Now it's creativity and innovation. And what they mean by creativity and innovation is sales techniques. I was at the meeting at my former university in the United States where this creativity course came up. And there was a senior business faculty member who stood up and said what I would have said. Can we please stop trying to create courses for last year's trend? But of course, it was all voted down. And the co-conspirator in all of this was the head of the theater department, who clearly, speaking of careerism, and I can't blame this person. There's not enough enrollment in theater, so what can we do? We need to have students in our classes, so we'll do anything to keep them there. And this is the assembly line model. This is what happens when the industrial model comes into the university. It's not about validity. It's about collecting tuition or having a program with enough people in it.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's interesting that you've mentioned that the conveyor belt of education, where all of a sudden there's kind of a lack of art and let's say natural creativity, natural curiosity. It has to be focused on careerism.
Yeah, it's getting a ticket stamped and the box is checked.
Yeah. And that's, at a certain point, I think that there's something really important to take a look at, possibly future issues with this kind of focus entirely on your output and not something that you really truly love,
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
So one thing that you stated in your article that I really appreciated that you did was Goodhart's law. So once a useful number becomes a measure of success, it ceases to be a useful number. I think that this is a really interesting point that a lot of educators, I think, are kind of feeling as a pain point right now. On one hand, some educators believe the necessity, like standardized tests and required curricula, while others might apply Goodhart's law when it comes to these metrics. Not everything needs to be quantified, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what are some success metrics you think would be truly helpful that might better reflect a student's capabilities beyond maybe just spitting out a test result or a score?
Well, first of all, not even thinking in those terms.
Yeah.
Something that alumni relations offices have talked about for years, but really need to thoroughly follow up on, and not in the context of fundraising, is asking graduates about what they value about their university education, what they feel they got from their university. However, I fear that this kind of intensive, not easily quantified learning that is the sort of thing administrators don't want to hear about. It would be very time consuming. It would not be quantifiable. It would be highly individualized. and it would take a lot of reading and thoughtful discussion. It's not the sort of thing that makes for a great PowerPoint presentation or a colorful chart in the back of the annual report.
You certainly can't circle dots on it either.
Right.
An assessment.
Yeah. And, what you would get would be a real portrait of students telling you what they got out of their education. I mean, one of the greatest things that ever happened to me as a professor, I got an email from a student out of the blue who told me that he happened to be in Prague for a semester abroad. He was a computer science major, and he told me that he had just attended a performance of Don Giovanni at the Estates Theater in Prague, and he had been in my freshman seminar, which was a multicultural course, and he said he was absolutely thrilled because he had studied the Mozart writing Don Giovanni and being in Prague at that time. And because he knew so much about it, he felt he'd really lived through a profound experience. And he said he would be eternally grateful for this. What does that have to do with computer science? But it provided him with a magnificent cultural experience, something that he clearly will treasure for the rest of his life, and connected him to the 18th century and the 21st century. And that's not the sort of thing that a number 2 pencil is useful for, filling in an oval.
Absolutely. And what an incredible experience it must be to be able to tie in all of these different elements of education and real world together.
Yes.
Yeah. So can you offer some suggestions, perhaps if there's a teacher who feels that they need more autonomy or in order to properly do their job or go back to the artisanal format of education, are there any suggestions you might offer?
Well, it's harder in public schools because the laws and regulations. But as far as universities go, we've got to take back administration from the bureaucrats. Unabashed holders of education administration degrees can take power at every level. And this is going on now. People who've never, as I said, people who've never been in front of a class or ever wanted to be in front of a class now run things. I have a former student who has a law degree who's somehow managed to become certified to be a school superintendent, and he's never been a full-time teacher. The dean of quality and accreditation at a university I know has a marketing degree. Faculty should use their assemblies or senates to fight the inertia that afflicts academia and relentlessly question assistant or associate directors, deans, or vice presidents, whatever they call themselves, whenever they add a new requirement that has nothing to do with teaching or interferes with coursework. I saw this time and time again at faculty assemblies where they would just automatically vote. Anyone who discussed or questioned was labeled a crank or a pain in the neck. Inevitability was the buzzword, and it's not a buzzword. It's a chain that fetters education, creativity in the classroom, and the joy of learning. And of course, the reason this has happened, faculty want to be in the classroom where they want to be doing their research. They don't want to be at endless committee meetings. They don't want to preside over curriculum restructuring. So they let go. And the harvest is ever onerous regulation and ever lessened autonomy in the classroom.
And, one thing that I think is really important to state here, if it's not already obvious to anyone who's reading or listening to the podcast, is that, the passion of education always starts with students, of course. And when we over-regulate a classroom, we're no longer serving those students. We're instead serving a system of metrics. So curriculum must be centered around that student or the holistic experience of education. How can we put focus back on students in the classroom?
I think it gets back to, as you said, the passion that we have as teachers to impart learning. We need to restore confidence in ourselves and take courage in our convictions. Too many faculty are too timid about challenges to what we do. Faculty are in the front line in the fight to open our students' minds and expand their vision of what humanity can accomplish. It's high time we remember what our calling is, to be professors and scholars who teach what best endures. We should not be reduced to trainers of future cubicle inmates. And this idea of teaching for careers or polling local businesses, what would you like to see our degree holders know how to do, is absurd and destroys the joy of learning, destroys the energy of the classroom. It makes it simply passing through. Again, it becomes an assembly line.
Mm-hmm. A means to an end.
And teacher autonomy is the best way to encourage freedom of thought. Mm. And a question for those who cry out for more career education. Why do you think the prep schools and colleges that these elite send their children to have always emphasized the liberal arts? It is still true that most CEOs have liberal arts degrees. They don't have business degrees. That's changing. I mean, it used to be almost 90% of the top executives were liberal arts majors, but it's still the majority. And why is that? It's not rocket science.
Absolutely. We have to have a holistic learning experience where people ultimately think for themselves and build these skills,
Yes. And I might add, I should say the liberal arts and sciences. That I don't mean to sound like I'm humanities biased at all. I think that all the liberal arts and sciences, physics, biology, those are vital and those are magnificent things to study. But the problem is this careerist. A university course on how to change a tire. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Certainly it's that makes a lot of sense. And I really appreciate your feedback and your insights on this topic. I think it's really important to discuss. And as you said, perhaps now more than ever, important to shed some light on it.
Yes.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add that we didn't cover?
Well, now I have my own children are in college, and I have to say, I know there's hope. Because the one child is at a public university and one is at a private university, and somehow these two places are enclaves of what we've been talking about. I've been really delighted at the variety of courses and the engagement that my children's professors have with them and with their course material. So we're not in the slough of despond. There are still the lamp is still burning in some places, and that gives me hope.
Oh, that's wonderful. There is light at the end of the tunnel, hopefully, let's say.
Yes.
Just with a good fight. We got to keep fighting the good fight.
Yes. Well, there still are the good, the true, and the beautiful are still with us.
That's good to hear. I'm happy. I'm happy. I'm optimistic for the future of education. I think as long as we have professors who are like you and who are working towards this kind of better holistic opportunities for students to learn what they love and be curious and have the space to be curious. I think that's what it all comes down to. So
absolutely. Yes, I completely agree.
Oh, well, thank you so much for your time, Professor Connolly. This was a wonderful conversation. And I loved your insights on this. And for our listeners and our readers out there, certainly take a look at Fruits from the Higher Branches of Learning, which is linked in our show notes below. Professor Connolly again. And thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. It was my pleasure.